This is Ken Forster, Executive Director at Momenta. Welcome to our Digital Thread podcast, produced by, for, and about digital industry leaders. In this series of conversations, we capture insights from the best and brightest minds in digital industry. They're executives, entrepreneurs, advisors, and other thought leaders. What they have in common is, like our team at Momenta, they are deep industry operators. We hope you find these podcasts informative, and as always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Good day and welcome to edition 141 of our Digital Thread podcast series. Today I'm pleased to host Simon Kampa, the CEO and co-founder of Senseye, the leading cloud-based solution for predictive maintenance 4.0. Senseye is one of our Momenta portfolio companies. Simon has over 20 years leading the development of mission-critical software across industry, aerospace, and defense. Before Senseye, he was managing director of Critical Software UK, where he expanded its operations and established its focus on data analytics systems for complex machinery, such as helicopters, aircraft, and trains. Simon then co-founded Senseye to disrupt the predictive maintenance domain with a fully automated and turnkey solution targeted at the wider industrial sector. Simon holds a PhD in computer science from the University of Southampton. Simon, welcome to our Digital Thread podcast.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks for inviting me onto this series. Always a pleasure talking with you and the team at Momenta.
Yeah, as well. And I know I say this all the time because I listen to my podcast and I always say, you know, we it's finally time that we had you on there, but you were one of our earliest investments. So it absolutely applies. I don't know why we've waited so long, but I'm sure, we'll have much better stories for that as well. So just in starting, what would you consider to be your digital thread? And in other words, the one or more thematic threads of experience that have defined your digital industry leadership journey?
Well, I guess it's always, even from when I did my PhD, it's always been about data and extracting value out of it. If I look back at my first career step, which was at Lockheed Martin in the defense industry, it was very much about analyzing, interoperability and data between different military assets. How do tanks and fighter jets share situational awareness and other tactical data? The next position I took then is even more about data. It's about analyzing London vehicle data. So this is back in the must have been the early 2000s when the congestion charge came out in London, and you had ways of analyzing all the vehicle data and start charging people and collecting evidence. So it's all about, again, collecting data. And then I went on to a home office project, which was about analyzing data on what's called kind of lawful interception of voice and data calls, aka wiretapping. So I can't talk much about that one. But again, that was about looking at huge quantities of data and extracting and value from it. And then, in my final position before, later setting up Senseye, which really set the foundation for Senseye, was working at a company called Critical Software and predicting failures in complex aircraft and helicopter machinery, such as imagine like a helicopter gearbox, a very complex piece of machinery that's put under incredible strain, and it's emitting a huge amount of data. And again, it's about extracting value from that data and giving insights about what's happening to that machine. Yeah, I guess my digital thread, going all the way back to my PhD and then my career up until today, is all about converting data to insight.
And that is a really good lead into our conversation today as well. So since you mentioned the PhD, let's go back to the start there. I noted that was in the semantic web, which certainly was a hot topic and remains one. What was the semantic web, and what were some of the insights from your studies around it at the time?
Well, I'm really pleased that you're familiar with the semantic web. I think it was, as you are, in the turn of the century, it was a massive topic, and it still has its followers and its influences, but perhaps the term itself is not so well known anymore. But it was coined back then by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the web, and he realized that the web was essentially dumb to machines. Computers couldn't understand what the content of the website was about and the web traffic was about, and so it was difficult to offer advanced services on it. And the vision by Sir Tim was always to, can we create a smart web where you can have very smart search engines and automated services and things. So my PhD was in that broader field and applying basic artificial intelligence type technologies to demonstrate the art of the possible. We had a smart web. What could we achieve? But there were two outcomes that happened from the semantic web, and I hesitate to say that ultimately I think the semantic web failed, as I don't think it did, but it did really contribute to advancing art of the possible and has morphed into other initiatives. But nevertheless, two of the big outcomes, I think, or what sort of in some ways muted it was, first, Page and Brin came along and founded Google in the 90s. And I remember actually coming across their stand at my first academic conference in 98 in Amsterdam, and they were giving away, free merchandise and whatnot. And actually at that point, I switched over to Google from Alta Vista, if you remember that old search engine, and haven't stopped since. But I think what Google proved, and this kind of disproved with the semantic web, that actually, brute force and lots of processing was a far more pragmatic solution that derived surprisingly good results. Because semantic web required quite a barrier to entry to adding a lot of metadata and other intelligence to the web, and Google, I think, proved actually we can be pretty good without doing that. And in a way, as an aside, and maybe we can mention this later as well, I would draw some parallels with that sort of pragmatic approach with our philosophy at Senseye as well. And I think the second reason why semantic web maybe didn't get the uptake that some would have liked it to, it does add a significant layer of complexity. Well, the beauty of the web is it's so simple and it's so accessible by everybody, and the semantic web really kind of went against that ethos and added that layer of complexity, added that entry, that barrier to entry. And actually, people were happy with good enough and the Google approach and things like that. So it's a great thing to learn from the semantic web, and it still influences thinking today. But I guess it doesn't really exist in the way that Tim Berners-Lee wanted it to.
Certainly not in the sense, I guess, that there are things that are explicitly, I'll use the term tagged to kind of simplify the idea of the semantics, versus the idea that things are discovered and self-identified and tagged. Think kind of XML in some sense, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think the explicit approach didn't happen, but that implicit one is where the power is in many things that we do, and especially when you think of the Internet of Things and this idea that devices are discoverable and their capabilities are discovered, and then their insights are discovered, right, as all part of the interrogation, if you will, with the devices. So I agree with you. I think it's a great lead into the work you guys are doing. I know you went on to lead enterprise-grade development efforts, Lockheed, that's also my alma mater, Siemens, and then finally ended up as managing director of Critical Software UK. A term that maybe the audience has forgotten here too as well, a CMMI level 5 company. As I remember, it was only IBM at the time for the space shuttle computers that had reached that pinnacle, if you will. But I know you guys are providing safety critical software engineering for aerospace, energy, defense, government, and transports. Tell us a bit about some of your early ones at Critical Software, and I guess really what inspired your interest in predictive maintenance there.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned CMI level 5. I think it still lives with us when you've worked at a company that has that for 6 years, and you are a very deterministic, almost process-driven business, and you have to be, because you're developing safety critical systems. And even today, when we think we're quite dynamic, startup with process light. A lot of our investors still say that we're quite process driven compared to others in their portfolio. So I guess we can't quite shake it off. But from a personal development perspective, it was my first role as a CEO, MD. So and that's good and bad, right? So you obviously get to learn the ropes on someone else's dime effectively, but then at the same time, I think some of the best founders have done it as a first job, and they're unencumbered by the corporate way of doing things. And I think we certainly noticed that in the first year at Senseye, that we had a little bit of that corporate overhang. Yeah, when we first met you, Ken, as well, that corporate overhang that we had to kind of unshackle ourselves from and become a bit free and in the way that startups operate. But during my time at Critical over the last 6 years, I did hire my 3 co-founders. So I guess that was the best thing I did there. And in particular, I hired Rob Russell, who's our CTO. And his background has been in aerospace for the preceding sort of 18 years when I hired him. He became the CTO of the newly established, I can't remember actually what we call it, like data division, I think, CTO of data, which was essentially tasked with expanding our predictive maintenance operations across the aerospace, rail, and other sort of critical industries. It wasn't called predictive maintenance then at all. That's sort of a newer word. It was, terms like diagnostics and condition monitoring and prognostics was used, but essentially it was predictive maintenance. So that really got us deeply into that world. And we worked on a number of really interesting projects for the largest companies, GE, Airbus, Boeing, and helicopter companies like Leonardo and Eurocopter and Sikorsky, as well as rail companies. And you're working on some really critical projects that if any failures on these sort of high value capex equipments leads to a loss of life. So you do feel that you're working on something really special. And I think that's what really got us into this space. And we always had a vision of this is great doing this technology for the big guys on big machinery, but can we take those concepts and that capability and actually offer it to the wider industry, who previously had been kind of locked out based on price fundamentally and also the complexity of having these systems. And I think that's why we then decided to set up Senseye. So yeah, I mean, Critical was the inspiration to Senseye, really.
And I think we first met you guys probably 2014 or 15, as I remember, at the time. And so you talk about the corporate overhead. As I remember, I think the initial challenge simply was just finding product market fit. You guys were looking at across a number of different sectors, some I would say biased a little bit by grant work you were doing at the time in the UKTI, but ultimately it was finding that sweet spot, of which you clearly did in that time. So you mentioned Rob Russell, your CTO, who also co-founded Senseye with you, and I believe we also met at the time your marketing head Alexander Hill, who also co-founded as well. Senseye, so one of the first companies that we knew of really looking at this idea of bringing condition monitoring, as you say, or prognostics down to, or making it more accessible, if you will, to other enterprises outside of the traditional defense. So when you guys left Critical Software to found this, I mean, what problem were you truly setting out to tackle, and really for whom in terms of your target group?
Yeah, well, for the first sort of 6 or 9 months, and I think it kind of culminated probably actually when you visited us in Southampton, Ken. I guess we did the classic mistake of startups where you start at the vision, and we were going to solve the world, right? Every vertical we wanted to tackle, and clearly you can never start in that way. So we wound up back to where the obvious place was, which is looking at machinery in the industrial space. I mean, we even had a spell in agriculture, you might remember, which was actually grant work, and that's probably the downside of grants. It can give you money to follow the wrong things. But by the end of 2015, which was our first year, we had sort of narrowed down to looking at predictive maintenance. Still wasn't a word in 2015 within the industrial space, in particular within a few sub-verticals. But the problem we were trying to solve was taking capability from the higher end sectors like oil and gas and aerospace, railways, where they're very, very unique, bespoke approaches. You're developing physics-based models, $100 million projects, and very skilled engineers using those tools, and say, well, can we create the same kind of capability, but it's a bit of a corny word, but democratize it, make it available to the wider industry who may only have motors and pumps and things, and offer them a similar capability. And to do that, you need to bring the cost down by several orders of magnitude, and that's obviously where AI and things come in, because you can start automating it, but also making it accessible to your average engineer, not a skilled diagnostic engineer, which may be commonplace in aerospace and oil and gas, but most industries haven't got those sort of skilled engineers. So we had to develop a way of automating something that's very complex, and then making sure the output and the user experience is as simple as possible. So that's sort of where we were at the end of 2015, and thanks to some clever people, including you guys at Momenta, we narrowed down that product market fit, and I think we're still tuning it. Every 6 months we still challenge ourselves and tune it. I think as you need to do, but the biggest sort of pivot, if you like, was at the end of 2015 to make sure that we really started to focus.
As I look at the other use cases you were looking at, like ag tech as an example, in some sense, the markets themselves are coming to you in terms of the availability of use cases, where the initial focus, I think, is absolutely really important to have, and to really prove and to tune your hypothesis about your value add. In some sense, I think the wider remit of the things you guys were looking at originally will come to pass, and it's a matter of those markets just getting to the point of ready. And I can certainly vouch for ag tech, because we're doing quite a bit of ag tech work lately.
Yep.
That is almost reminiscent of what you guys were looking at in the first place. I had to laugh when you said the word democratize was a bit corny, but in some sense, that is what Moore's law truly is. It's the democratization law in some sense,
Yep.
right? And in IoT, you've seen that, especially where what was heretofore SCADA systems, PLCs, things like that are being done on in some cases Arduino boards, right? And kind of low impact, if you will, use cases. And so you naturally see that democratization coming down to all things OT or IoT in that case. So tell us about some of your notable use cases and wins at Senseye.
Yeah, well, in the first days, first year, it was just trying to get access to machines and data. So we that's just almost desperately, you need to charge for it. So luckily we had some local companies that were willing to do that, and that was the start. But they were never going to be our sort of customers, because our sweet spot was always going to be the very high scale diverse factories. And that in itself is a bit of a problem in emerging industries, where the initial use cases are often limited to small scopes of the factory or single machines and things. But in terms of our first sort of notable win, this was in 2016, was with Nissan in the UK, and the timing just happened to be spot on for that, because Nissan at that point had strategic ambitions to increase the productivity of their plants, and the UK plant in particular had been given the remit to explore that. And they had a couple of failed projects with your typical sort of big industrial automation businesses, and then they found out about us, and it was just a perfect timing, because they were under pressure to prove something, and they had 2 failures already, and then they got this nice little UK startup with experience in aerospace and things. That just clicked for them. So there was huge pull from them. They unusually had a lot of digital data already. This is back in 2016, and I still think within the automotive industry they're an anomaly in terms of having so much of the factory covered by digital equipment and collecting sensor data. So that was our first really big win, and it continues to be a great account that keeps going from strength to strength. And then soon after, maybe 6 months after that, so this is probably the end of 2016, we secured our first, if you like, a really competitive win with a major steel producer, where we were pitted against 12 other vendors, including the usual big guys, incumbents, and some of the younger competitors. And I was like, wow, this is going to be a tough one. Alex, my co-founder, is more naturally optimistic. He was like, yeah, great, we'll do this. And we won it hands down. And I think that was a great marker for us to say, hey, we're okay. We can compete here. We generally have a product that, has been produced by a much smaller team. At that time, must have been 15, 20 people. And we can compete with some of the big guys. So that's a really major milestone for us, to give us that recognition and credibility that we were serious players.
You've used the term predictive maintenance or PDM4 to describe your solution space. What does the term mean to you, and how does this differ from condition monitoring as an example, or prognostics?
Yeah, I mean, Alex came up with that term, and I quite like it. For us, predictive maintenance 4.0 is really covering in entire factories, not just limiting the scope. And if you look at Industry 4.0, it's all about big transformation project and making it covering your entire supply chain and your factories with it, making it very accessible to your average engineers, to your leadership team. And we see a lot of predictive maintenance projects that are so narrow in their focus that we kind of wonder, well, what there's a lot more impact they could be having. And so for us, it's always about that massive scale and integrating it with so many other Industry 4.0 sort of systems, so don't have them in silos. In terms of how it relates to all those other terms, I mean, for me and for us, predictive maintenance is the sum of diagnostics, prognostics, condition monitoring, and prescriptive analytics and things. And it's kind of there's no sort of one technology that suits the solution. So it's a combination of all those.
Let's drill down on some of those terms, because the audience may not be up to speed on that, and I think you guys have developed some nice semantics there. So as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I look at industrial analytics, I'll call it maturity. There's descriptive analytics, kind of tells you what happened in the past, think a dashboard, if you will. Diagnostic analytics, what helps you understand, or it helps you understand why something has happened in the past. Predictive analytics, which we've been speaking of, so predict what's most likely to happen in the future. And then something that kind of the nirvana of the industry is prescriptive analytics, so recommending actions you can take to affect those likely outcomes. Do you generally agree with these definitions? And if so, when do you see us arriving at this pinnacle of prescriptive?
Yeah. I've seen those and similar descriptions in the media and the press and other places. I can't say I'm the biggest fan of them, at least not the first two. I see them very much as an IT-driven take on an OT problem space. And for example, I wouldn't classify diagnostics only about looking at the past. Traditionally we use diagnostics to tell about the future. You can kind of look at the current state of the machine and identify whether it's in a failure mode, and then you can make a interpretation of when you think it might fail. It may not be as accurate as predictive analytics, but it can still be used to sort of talk about a future event. And certainly in aerospace, those terms were and still are used. But just to expand on what I said in the previous question, for us, predictive maintenance has to be all those four working in unison. It's not a mutually exclusive list. And the different machines behave differently, different scenarios. You've got different people operating it. So no one technology approach will give you all the answers. And as for prescriptive analytics, I would agree with that definition. And there are some solutions, including ours, that provide some of that functionality. But certainly Rob Russell, our CTO's view on it, he's a little bit more anxious about it. He thinks by definition it's always going to be a very customer-centric approach, because each customer has different processes and standards. Each one does maintenance in a different way. They have maybe different protocols for when to take certain actions. So it's always going to be very specific to a customer, and that then by definition makes it harder to automate and create a solution that then scales. So we support prescriptive analytics to an extent, but it is driven by the customer having to add some of their expert knowledge into the system, which then, for us is it's a big challenge, because we like to have a fully automated system out of the box, turnkey, and as soon as the customer has to do something, it kind of negates that a little bit. But so I'd say we're getting there, Ken, on prescriptive. But maybe another 2 or 3 years away before we can truly call it that.
Yes, I guess the best analogy I've seen is at least on the ag tech side, since we mentioned earlier, the idea that instead of just predicting crop yield, based on environmental factors and such, you actually, in some sense, inform it by telling you what seed to plant at what point to fertilize, what point to water, and of course that goal setting, if you will, is reassessed every day. And so, in some sense, you achieve the yield you set out based on putting all the factors together versus just predicting, that the yield will be a certain percentage or a perspective, if you will. So it's pretty interesting because you start to see that coming even in process industries we're seeing where, setting these goals is, efficiency of the line more important, or, do I have a need to drive the equipment at, maybe 90% of capacity, which I know will shorten its life, but will get out these, 6 orders that I have to get out. And so fully agree with you that it is very much customer driven, but it's also very much driven by almost day to day, if you will, customer needs. And so there is a whole world ahead of where we sit with predictive, but you guys, I think, are already building the basis for that. So let me ask, how do you know when an organization is truly ready to adopt predictive maintenance for not, as you call it? And what best practices have you seen in truly realizing that potential value?
Yeah, this is a massive area, and I think I'm pretty sure every single one of our peers and competitors has the same challenge. There's a huge demand for wanting Industry 4 technologies and predictive maintenance, but that demand is not always met by readiness. So yeah, I in my head I see it as, let's say, in our industries at least 90% of businesses want to do predictive maintenance, but in our experience of those, maybe only 20% are going to be worth engaging. But the trouble is, a bit like it's a similar quote in marketing, you don't know which that 20% is until you spend considerable effort with them. And that other 80% can, in the meantime, sap a lot of your pre-sales effort and energy before you can realize it's not going to really be a successful project. And we focus only on the largest kind of Fortune 1000 type companies, so they're all big logos and things. You all want them to succeed, but a lot are just not in the right place yet to succeed at scale. So we and others see it as very much sort of 2 areas that we look for a company to kind of judge a company's readiness. One is probably the most important. It's cultural readiness, and not just for predictive maintenance, but in Industry 4.0 in general. And we look for, is there strategic support from the C-levels for such initiatives? There's an awful lot that seem to sit in the innovation R&D arm, but don't really have any operational support. So we look for strategic support, and more specifically, we look also then for are there already good maintenance practices? Because if they haven't got the fundamentals in place, they're not even doing preventative maintenance properly, then it's going to be harder to get the workforce to adopt a more proactive, a more advanced solution. So we look for that, and there's a number of other factors we look for. And the second one, also important, but you can negate it if the first one, the cultural one, is strong, is technical readiness. Most businesses, I don't think, fully appreciate what data they've got available, or they haven't, how to extract it and how to share it. And even if they do have an idea, they then lack the capacity to do the job themselves. So you can bring partners in, but the whole thing, slows it down. And we've kind of encapsulated these 2 sort of vectors in something we call the PDM Readiness Index, which our sales teams use together with a customer to kind of evaluate their status quo, where they are and where they're going, and whether it could lead to a successful project, and basically trying to qualify them out or in as quickly as possible. Because in the early days, we learned the hard way that you can spend over a year getting closer and closer to a customer, and then realize actually, there's never going to be anything here worthwhile really in terms of a big project, because the company's just not there yet in their stage of evolution. And I saw, I'm sure you've read these as well, Ken. There were a number of studies come out over the last 18 months from all the big analysts, Gartner and ABI and Forster and things, about somewhere in between 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 Industry 4.0 projects don't scale. And some of that will be because the products themselves may not be fit for purpose for the vision of Industry 4. But a lot of it, I think, is also just businesses not being quite ready yet and not maybe getting to grips with what Industry 4.0 really is and what the trends underlying it really are.
You mentioned the last 18 months. Just as an aside, I'm curious, what patterns have you seen over the COVID timeframe, if you will, relative to, well, both of your business, but more importantly, the use cases that you guys are really driving?
Certainly, I mean, Q2 aside last year, what we've seen is very much an acceleration in this space. I think, COVID has highlighted the inefficiencies in supply chains and productivity issues and things. So those have, I would say, accelerated. The industry that we've probably seen the most acceleration and most sort of momentum and purpose is metals and mining, where in the midst of the worst of COVID, last May or June, we secured another metals mining customer, and we've probably secured one every 2 months since then. For these guys, a lot of them, it's very difficult for them to turn off their equipment. These might be big blast furnaces and another very expensive capex rich equipment that it's difficult for them to turn off. So their only choice really is to optimize what they've got. So they've been accelerating initiatives like predictive maintenance.
Great insights there, and pretty interesting to see the metals and mining angle on that. So, given your own entrepreneurial journey, especially having arrived at kind of starting your own company here in 2014, what advice would you give other startup founders?
My wife would say, "Don't do it." But I'll ignore that, and that's quite the opposite. Do it, and you know this, Ken, because you've teased me about it. But I don't think it's an issue in the US, but in Europe, there's probably a little bit more anxiety about setting up shop on your own. In Europe, we don't like failure, so that I think that stops some people from taking the leap. So I'd first say, just do it. And I think once you go over those first 2 or 3 months, you'll never look back, and you can never ever go back to the corporate world. But beyond that, and for us. And I mentor a couple of other companies, and it's the same. What I say to them, it's all about focus, and that product market fit. And I've seen so many other peers I talked to, they were like us in the early days. They're starting at the vision. They're trying to execute the vision from day one rather than developing a journey to get to the vision. But first, just get a little bit of proof, get a proof point to prove that your product works and there is a customer willing to buy it. I think there's a lot of impatience out there, people wanting to accelerate that and start with the vision. So I say the focus word again there. Otherwise, just in general, I would say, and that's why I quite enjoyed this exercise, is get your head out of the minutiae of the business, which because you're a founder and a CEO, you wear a lot of hats and you get involved in so many parts of the business. Sometimes it's really difficult to step away and reflect, and those are the important points where you need to have that strategic time and headspace to think about where you're heading. And the other thing, as it's Mental Health Week, I'll say look after your mental health, because that can strike suddenly when you're, and it's a very stressful environment, and you do need to look after yourself, because it kind of, I've been lucky, I haven't experienced it myself, but I've seen others where it silently creeps up on people, and then it hits them, and then suddenly they're out of the business for 2 or 3 or 4 months, which is obviously a disaster for a startup. So everyone, look after your mental health and take activities and actions to look after yourself.
Yeah, excellent advice, especially on the latter point. People, I think, generally underestimate the challenge we've all had, given sheltering in place, COVID restrictions, and even simple things like running out of toilet paper, right? Or the runs, I should say, on toilet paper as they were early on. So it makes you appreciate the little things in life, doesn't it? Which a good lead into the final question. Where do you find your personal inspiration?
Yeah, I struggle with these kind of questions, Ken. It's like I can't name my favorite food or my favorite song, and my favorite that. I look at a lot. I read a lot of books, and I follow a lot of different people on LinkedIn and things. But what really interests me all the time is, and we've been in the industry for world since 2014. So I guess in some ways that makes us veterans, and I find it so exciting, just that the whole sort of that whole ecosystem of Industry 4.0, how it's been developing, how it's still changing dramatically, and different sort of angles are coming up, and I'm seeing exciting startups come and go, and I'm meeting fellow entrepreneurs, and just seeing what competitors do. I think it's fascinating what sometimes competitors think of that we haven't, and you can learn a lot from that. So for me, it's really just that mass dynamism and buzz in the Industry 4 space on globally that I just find enthralling.
Yeah, we certainly do as well. I've always liked the Silicon Valley term co-opetition, as there's really no competition. There's just the ability to collaborate and compete at the same time, which is a nice dichotomy to hold in your mind. But that is an ecosystem by definition, right? Everything overlaps a little bit and supports each other, and derives from each other. So, well, Simon, thank you for spending this time with us today.
No, thanks, Ken, really for inviting me onto this. And as I said to you before the talk, it allowed me to, when I was thinking about some of the things I'd like to say yesterday, it really allowed me just to sit back and reflect on the journey we've taken. And I think that's a really healthy exercise. So thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and I think the journey, as we joked earlier on, predictive versus prescriptive, is I think the journey is just beginning, and so it is a very fun place to see, especially those of us who, like yourself, who have deep, really DNA, who have seen this industry in aerospace and other sectors, and you see all of this literally democratizing, to use your term, coming down. So there's a lot ahead of us in this regard, and you guys are very well placed. So we're proud to be investors in you. So this has been Simon Kampa, CEO and co-founder of Senseye, and if I can say so, extractor of industrial insights. We'll call you the miner. So thank you for listening, and please join us next week for the next episode of our Digital Thread podcast series. Thank you, and have a great day. You've been listening to the Momenta Digital Thread podcast series. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion, and as always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Please check our website at momenta.one for archived versions of podcasts, as well as resources to help with your digital industry journey. Thank you for listening.